Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, loyalists and heretics, welcome to Dawn of War Dark Crusade. I'm sure many of you have not seen or played this game in a very long time, to be honest with you. Until fairly recently I was the same. I hadn't played this game in years. But recently I got back into playing Warhammer 40,000, which for those of you who've been living under a rock for quite some time, especially if you're in the UK, it's a tabletop war game using miniatures set in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. 41st millennium, hence the name Warhammer 40,000. It's kind of sci-fi, it's kind of a bit fantasy, it's mostly ridiculous. And I love it. I love it to bits. I always have. I've always loved the lore and stuff for this universe, even when I wasn't playing the tabletop game. But recently, I got back into it because they released a new edition of the game, which was pretty good. And Games Workshop, the company that makes it all, they recently had kind of quite a big change in approach towards their consumer base and things like that. I won't bore you with the details, but they're not being quite so greedy anymore, and they're actually behaving like a decent company, which is nice. Anyway, so I got back into the game, and what I ended up doing was going through my Steam library and kind of finding all the old Warhammer games that I've got, and started playing through a bunch of them again. Some of them I've actually streamed recently on Twitch. If you're one of the folks that follow me on Twitch, you'll be well aware of this. Both the Warhammer Fantasy games and the 40k ones. I mostly play the 40k ones, and since there's more 40k games than anything else, but yeah, there's loads. And I want to play a few here on the channel for a bit. I'm going to have sort of a couple of weeks or so. I think I'm just going to play some Warhammer 40k games. And I'm beginning with Dawn of War, because Dawn of War is probably the best Warhammer game ever, really. I mean, most of you who've played it and enjoyed this game will probably agree with me that before and since, there really hasn't been a Warhammer 40k computer game that ever really came close to beating Dawn of War. The original Dawn of War, that is to say, anyway. There was Dawn of War 2 and more recently Dawn of War 3. And I wasn't particularly fond of either of them, let's say. But the original Dawn of War and its 3 expansions, well, the last one wasn't so great, but the first 2 expansions certainly, this is the third you're looking at right now, Dark Crusade, were absolutely phenomenal. This game is obviously a real-time strategy game, in case you hadn't guessed. And it is one of the best real-time strategy games ever made, in my opinion. It is. I enjoyed this game so much back in the day that it is the only RTS that I have ever actually played online semi-competitively. Which is saying something, because I don't like competitive multiplayer games very much. This was the game that made me break that rule, though. And I absolutely love it to bits. Still, even now to this day, after having gone back and checked to see, is the game really as good as I remember it being? Yep, turns out it absolutely is. So yeah, we're going to play a bit of it. We're going to do some skirmishes. This game has a campaign. Dark Crusade has a pretty large campaign. The original game, as it was released, had a sort of single-player, sort of story-driven campaign. That was followed by the Winter Assault expansion, which had a story campaign that could be played from multiple perspectives, and then Dawn of War Dark Crusade did away with that, and they introduced a campaign that was more like a total war game, essentially. You had a big campaign map with provinces, and you battled for control of the entire map with all the other factions in the game. All 3 were pretty good in their own ways. They did different things, and they excelled at pretty much all of them. Dark Crusade, however, was always my favourite, because Dark Crusade introduced 2 new factions on top of the existing ones, and it really made the game a lot bigger all of a sudden, is how I'll put it, but anyway. So it takes place in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you're not familiar with it, there's a lot, really. It's like trying to explain Star Wars to someone who's never watched a Star Wars movie. You probably just get the gist as we play, but the short version is, it's the 41st millennium. Humanity rules most of the galaxy as part of a super-duper, quite grim and dark and oppressive regime called the Imperium, which is ruled over by the god emperor of mankind who lives on Earth, and who is mostly dead at this point, and is being kept alive on something called the Golden Throne, which is a kind of ancient life support system. The secrets of technology have mostly been forgotten. Humanity is kind of living in a bit of a dark age. Things are not so great, and they're beset on all sides by all sorts of horrific aliens and demons from somewhere called the Warp, which is kind of like hell, but it's a bit more complicated than that. It's pretty grim. That's why they call it the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. But this game is set in it. There's a hell of a lot more to it. It's one of those fantasy / sci-fi universes which has a quite dizzying amount of content in it. It's pretty huge. But in the game, as far as it's concerned, we have a bunch of factions we can play as. Now, if you're familiar with something like StarCraft, where you have like 3 factions, this might blow your mind because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 factions in this game, and the next expansion after this one added another 2 on top of that. Those factions are the Imperial Guard, which you're seeing right here, which are the regular human foot soldiers of the Imperium. They die in their millions constantly. Their existence is purely to serve as cannon fodder, essentially. You have the Space Marines, who are genetically enhanced super soldiers who are basically running around in something called power armor, which basically turns them into living tanks. And they're very, very powerful, but there's not a lot of them. And they're divided into chapters, which are something a bit like regiments, who all have their own slightly garish color schemes. And generally speaking, they're all kind of badass in their own different ways. And they all have their own interesting histories behind them and so on and so forth. If you're even remotely familiar with Warhammer 40,000, you probably will have seen a Space Marine on a box somewhere, because these guys are kind of the poster boys of the entire game, really, at the end of the day. In addition to that, you have Chaos, which in this case is the Chaos Space Marines. These are more Space Marines, but these guys are evil, basically. That's all you really need to know, realistically. They've been corrupted by the influence of the Chaos gods of the Warp, and now they basically worship demons, and they're not so nice. You also have the Eldar, who, to simplify things, we'll just call them Space Elves. I think that'll probably do. We have Orcs, which more or less speak for themselves. So moving on, we also have the Tau Empire, which is sort of these vaguely Chinese-inspired, Japanese-inspired, blue-skinned dudes that like to shoot things with laser rifle-y things, and they're very anime-inspired, to be honest with you. I've never been a big fan of them, to be honest with you, and they have auxiliary aliens that serve in their armies, like the Kroot here, for example. But anyway, that's the Tau, and then finally you have the Necrons, which are basically robot zombie undead dudes, as far as this game is concerned, anyway. That rise up from their tomb worlds, where they've been buried for frickin' forever. They used to rule the galaxy billions of years ago, or whatever it is, and now they're waking up again, and they want to kill all the living things. Pretty straightforward. There are other armies and factions, loads of them actually in the 40k universe, but these are the only ones actually in the game. And they all play in their own unique sort of way in the game. They're all very different from one another, and I'm going to do a series of videos, I hope, where we're basically going to do a bunch of skirmish matches as either as or against each one of these races here that you can see. Some of them I'm much better at than others. Some of them I genuinely don't even like very much. I'm not a huge fan of the Space Elves here, or the Tau. I don't like them much either. I love Orcs. I think Orcs are fantastic, and I love Imperial Guard. And I'm kind of cool with Space Marines, and every now and again I play a bit of Chaos. But yeah, we are going to play some Dawn of War. If you're not interested, you've probably already stopped watching the video by now. But aside from that, we're just going to start a skirmish. And I think that will be the entire video. I'll do the skirmish match, and then when that ends, the video will end. And then that'll be the format going forward, I think. I'm going to play a skirmish match, and then that'll be the video, and then I'll do another video where we play another skirmish match. And they're reasonably long, depending on how many players are involved. It's going to be me versus a shitload of AI, mostly. So that's what we're going to do. And I hope you enjoy it. In fact, I'm going to just go ahead and split the video right here, because I've been talking for approximately about 10 minutes now. So I think I'll split this off as an intro video, and then I'll go ahead and cut it, and we'll make the next one, and I'll get jumping straight in. So there you go. All right, see you in a minute then.